On today's show, the San Diego Padres lose the first game in this crucial series against the Mets, and I'm being joined by the host of Locked On Mets to break it all down, as well as the rest of the series pitching matchups and exactly why this is such a huge series. So let's get to it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Friday, August 23rd. As always, I'm your host with sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You may be familiar with my other baseball-related work over at justbaseball.com, a fantastic website that I recommend everyone checking out, or my other podcast for them, Baseball versus the World. You can follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiiipeno, the best handle in the game. But I may have the best handle, but sometimes there's been a bit of a debate of whether or not I have the best overall name. And one of the contenders for one of the best overall names is my guest on today's show, Mr. Ryan Finkelstein, the host of Locked On Mets, the extraordinaire, the Lindor appreciator and enjoyer. Sir, how you doing on this fine Friday?
I'm doing great, man. Yeah, a little tired. I spent way too much time just giving Lindor the full MVP case right up, and hopefully people will check that out at Just Baseball, like you mentioned there. But I'm doing good, and I need to take a nap today because we got a 9:40 start on the East Coast for Mets Padres. I believe this is the last West Coast trip for the Mets, and I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And look, here's the thing. People who know me know that I love Francisco Lindor. No, I did not ask Fink to write that piece. He is actually literally my editor, so that's not actually how that would work. Just a little peek under the hood. But first game done in this series, 8-3 for the Mets. And I think that, this is a series that is vitally important. I think for both teams, not just because of the playoff implications, but just because, I don't know, the Mets are on this really weird thing. There was a great Jeff Passan tweet or post article on Francisco Lindor and his leadership and how this has become a big thing for the Mets this season. And it's a team that really didn't have a lot of expectations, I think, heading into the year. I think a lot of people were like, yeah, they're going to be rebuilding, which is one of my favorite things that teams do, because I swear teams are better if they just say that. I swear on everything I own. I have no stats to back this up, but I kind of like when teams are like, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a process for us. Instead of, yeah, man, it's Super Bowl or bust. Like when that starts becoming a thing, or in this case, World Series or bust, it just feels like the Mets heading into the season, don't get me wrong, they still have good players. They have your McNeils, who won the batting title not too long ago. We have the aforementioned Francisco Lindor. You have Pete Alonso hitting home runs. You have some interesting young prospects like Francisco Alvarez and now Mark Vientos. But I don't think there was a lot expected of him, especially with the Max Scherzer being gone, Justin Verlander being gone, Jacob deGrom being gone. And yet they are in the hunt for the playoffs, man. And they took game one. Just to recap really quickly, the Mets there's not much to talk about here, frankly. It's not because I want this podcast to be, I just kind of want to ignore all the losses for the Padres right now. We have to keep it as positive as possible. I pretend I do not see it, basically, but this one basically comes down to the Padres offense not quite keeping up with the Mets, who took Cease deep into the game, and then Logan Gillespie, one of the few bullpen arms that the Padres currently have, that isn't necessarily a guy that's a shutdown, superstar sort of reliever. He gives up 5 earned runs. Cease labors through the game, gives up 9 hits and 2 earned runs, but he was okay overall. What were your reactions from last night's first game of this 4-game set?
Yeah, I mean, it was a game that had a couple pivotal moments. In the 5th inning, Luis Severino, very close to sort of giving that game up. He looked good through the first 4, then the 5th inning, kind of a disaster. He was coming off a shutout his last time out, so it seemed like he was kind of taxed a little bit, and that was the inning he ran out of gas. And Jose Iglesias, with those incredibly soft hands that he has, takes a 111-mile-per-hour ball at the bat of Jake Cronenworth and turns it into 2 outs. So that was really the defining play of the game for me, because has that ball gotten through, Padres get back in it. And I think in this series, the Mets have to win these games early. You don't want to be trying to win these games late against the Padres bullpen when you're seeing the Tanner Scotts, the Jason Adams of the world. So they were able to avoid that being a blow-up inning. The Mets bullpen held up, surprisingly enough, until we got to the bottom of the ninth inning. At that point, the game was decided. So I think those were kind of the main things here, to see the Mets be able to avoid giving up a bunch of runs with Sevy on the mound, and then those middle innings getting through those without any damage as well.
I'm glad you felt the same way as I did, which I basically think the bottom of the fifth basically changes the game for those who might have missed it. Mason McCoy draws a walk, Arise gets a single, then Profar gets a walk, and it's like, oh my God, here we go. This is what the Padres have been doing all year. The best team in Major League Baseball in high leverage situations with runners in scoring position. And Profar being the best player in baseball in high leverage situations this year, because baseball is just so stupid, isn't it? But also beautiful. But Jay Cronenworth, the hardest hit ball of the entire night into a double play. Expected batting average, according to Baseball Savant, was 720 on that. So if that doesn't happen, all of a sudden, that's like possibly a double, and then the game's potentially tied, or at least it's 3-2, nobody out, maybe a runner on second and third. I don't know, something like that. And instead, after that, eventually later on in the game, the Padres bullpen, like I mentioned with Logan Gillespie, kind of gives it up. But hey, Padres fans, remember, it was basically just that one play. I really do believe that. Like, I think the entire game shifts if not for that Iglesias play, and Jay Cronenworth getting unlucky, which he sometimes does. But nonetheless, still got 3 more games of the series, man. I think that and also we mentioned Francisco Lindor and his crusade for the MVP, which is what you wrote about, by the way, recently, coming out for Just Baseball. 2 for 4 with a double and a walk in this game. It feels like that's the whole motor engine for this team. And if I'm not mistaken, Fig, isn't there a stat on how Lindor plays and wins versus losses, and it's like the biggest splits for a player like in all of baseball?
Yeah, his OPS, I mean, it was probably about a week or 2 ago when that started really circulating. So I don't know how it's adjusted since I looked last time, but the OPS in wins was over 1,000, and then in losses, it was like 500. So it was literally doubled in Mets wins, which generally, because I've looked at that in the past, I know for Pete Alonso, I've looked at that at times, where you're just wondering, like, is this guy really the engine that drives the team? And it seems like that's pretty much the norm for any kind of important player that you're going to see. That it makes sense. Obviously, if they hit a home run, the team had a better chance to win. But usually it's like 850 OPS in the wins and a 750 OPS. Like, it's usually not that drastic. For Lindor, everything really has been predicated on what he does. You even watch it last night when Huascar Brazaban is trying to make it a game in the 9th inning, and he is just imploring him to throw strikes. He's got his fingerprints on everything for the Mets. He really does.
Yeah, absolutely. And that might be the definition of what an MVP is. We'll have to see between him and the dastardly Dodger, Shohei Ohtani. And we're going to talk about the rest of the series and kind of the general vibes about both teams, especially why I think this series is so big in the wild card race and whatnot. And maybe, let's just say I don't want to play the Mets in the playoffs because I don't want a reversal of what happened in 21. I would not appreciate that whatsoever, guys. But before we get into the rest of that, I need to take a second to talk to you fine, lovely, beautiful folks in these hot times. You know what I mean, Fink? It's hot out here. You got to stay hydrated. And with the legendary, the iconic Liquid IV, you can do just that. Get hydrated with electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients from the #1 powdered hydration brand in America. Ignore my voice crack, because baseball and summer go together like Liquid IV and indulgent hydration. And me, Ryan knows this too. He knows this very much. I'm a big fan of variety. I love different flavors, and Liquid IV has you covered with that. It is fantastic. They've got this new popsicle firecracker flavor, which is a festive blend. Check this out, of citrus-fueled lemon, lime, tart, cherry, and raspberry flavors. That sounds delicious. And they also have acai berry, lemon, lime, pina colada, and many, many more. So what are you waiting for? Go check out liquidiv.com and use code MLB at checkout for 20% off your first order. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MLB at liquidiv.com. But that's not all, folks. I also want to talk about the very good folks over at Supply House. Supply House is great. It is for all the skilled trades peoples out there. Let me tell you, order supplies from the website that's made for just that. Thousands of parts from hundreds of brands in a couple clicks at supplyhouse.com. It gives you 24/7 access to a huge selection of plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with fast delivery anywhere in the US. And if you need help with an order, you can call them up. It's real people. Don't worry. No robocalls or anything like that are experts in these areas. And if you're one of those contractors, technicians, and plumbers, you could also try out their Trade Master program. Over 100,000 pros already trust the Trade Master program to deliver results with free shipping and serious discounts on every order. Check it out, guys. Save time and money when you order online. Real people, real service with Supply House. Go check it out. And just like that, we're back here on the Locked On Padres podcast. I didn't say Locked On Mets because Fink, being the overworker, the little tryhard that he has, already put out his podcast for today. But we're back here, thriving and vibing as always. Mr. Ryan Finkelstein, can you tell us exactly what is the general state of the Mets right now? Because we kind of talked about it in the first segment, but this is a big playoff race. Obviously, the Padres currently have around a 92% chance to make the playoffs. They are tied for the first wild card spot with the Arizona Diamondbacks, who for some reason keep winning. It is very frustrating that they decide to go on a crazy winning streak at the exact same time as the Padres. And then the Atlanta Braves at 68 wins, and right behind them is the Mets at 67. So let's talk about it, man. How big is this series? Let the people know.
It's huge for the Mets. I mean, they have the next two series. It's this one, then they put the Diamondbacks. It's a huge road trip. Luckily, the final leg of it is a nice little pit stop in Chicago to play the White Sox, but you can't lose a bunch of games here to the Padres and the Diamondbacks and expect to stay in this race. They got to at least, keep their head above water. In this series, you want to at least win two. But honestly, if you can beat the Padres, if you can beat the Diamondbacks, coming off the heels of beating the Orioles, I think the Mets are going to be in really good shape moving forward. The state of the team, they were the best team in baseball from June through July. August, there was some struggles on a tough West Coast trip before this one. They just had a really huge series against the Orioles with 2 walk-off victories that, if you believe into narrative and hype and stuff, it feels like the magic came back in those games. And then obviously the first one in San Diego, we never quite know, but I think the Mets are in a good position right now for a stretch run of the season. Their bullpen's getting a little bit better, but more importantly, they got Starling Marte back. This is a very deep team, and I think they're going to be able to hopefully slug their way into the playoffs.
Yeah, and now I will say I think that a lot of people bring up the Padres' depth as being an issue. I genuinely think that is not true at all this year. I don't understand why if you have to be the Dodgers, and that's the only team that has. If we go by that standard, then only the Dodgers have depth. I think that's ridiculous. But yeah, I think this is really fascinating because look, the Padres all season, while they have ripped off an incredible amount of wins, Jackson Merrill is now the Rookie of the Year leader according to odds based on FanDuel. That's all well and good, but this is still a team that over and over these past 4 years has shown that they aren't consistent. I know that everyone brings up on your side of the pond the Mets collapse or whatever, and I use quotations because I don't think that I just don't think you can win 100 games and that's called a collapse. I get it. I know that they lost the big Brave series. Doesn't make any sense to me. I'm sorry. You won 100 games. But I think that with this Padres team, one thing that they've done over the course of the year, and by the way, it was to the Mets. Famously, they got swept by the Mets back in, when the heck was that? July? And Dylan Cease, he's getting absolutely obliterated in those starts. Just was not very good. It was not very competitive. So you still have to keep your foot on the pedal in these times. And as Lindor was quoted in that pass and tweet, MVPs, they're won in September and August. So I think that this Padres team still has a lot to go, and we're going to see the rest of the series because I think it's going to be fascinating to watch these pitching matchups, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. But man, I really hope they make the playoffs, man. I'm going to be really upset if they don't. I don't know if the Padres can take blowing this. I really don't. I don't think that they can fall out to the Mets and the Braves or whoever. I think it's unlikely, but even still, them doing that would be a failure on such a colossal level that obviously someone would be getting fired. And it would also kind of enforce my belief that they gave up a lot at the trade deadline this year. And I think that's important. While the Mets, it feels like the Mets are playing with house money right now. Am I wrong in saying that?
No, I think you're spot on with that. Honestly, I'm in my mind just kind of thinking about it. There's right now, it seems like there's 4 teams in this race for 3 spots: the Padres, the Diamondbacks, the Braves, and the Mets. I think the Padres, it hurts the most if you get bounced. For the Mets, you're just happy you're there. For the Diamondbacks, maybe a little bit, but I feel like they have a pretty long window. And then the Braves, you can just say, well, everything went wrong. So yeah,
Yeah.
the Padres are the team where if they end up missing out, that's going to be huge because they did give up a lot to build that bullpen, and that bullpen is made for October, and
Mhm.
it feels like a team that is set up really well to try to make that run. The Mets, like you said, they're playing with house money to a certain extent for sure. To
It's
me,
so
I've been
weird to say that, yeah.
but it's true because everyone talked about bridge year and all that stuff, and I've heard it on the Just Baseball show a million times this year, and it frustrates me because nobody within the Mets actually ever said bridge year. The
Mhm.
media said bridge year, and everyone has built off of it. The Mets said the same thing all the way through. They intended to be a playoff team this year. If they weren't, they would have sold. But they've basically done what they expected. They put together a team that was good enough to stay in this race. And to me, I think the difference for the Mets is go into that final week of the season where they're playing the Braves and have a chance. And I call it a win of the season. Like
Mhm.
just get to that final week and have played competitive baseball where you're in it wire to wire. And I think it's a good year for this team because it gives them enough to build on. Where next year, with some of the prospects rise up and everything, they can have a better chance at it. But I mean, if you're in that clubhouse, it's time to get greedy and just make the playoffs this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the crazier things have happened. And I think that the Mets, yeah, they don't exactly have a bullpen or a rotation that I think is, built for October conventionally. And I think that was a little bit of a surprise for a lot of people last night as well, by the way, is that everyone was just like, well, Padres versus this Mets bullpen, they got to make a comeback, right? But I think that it's really, really important to just not always count on this Padres offense making these comebacks. Eventually, you have to just look at history. Is Jackson Merrill going to be able to keep this up? Maybe, absolutely, it's possible. But you also have to look at the fact that Xander Bogaerts has not been performing in high leverage situations. You have to look at the fact that this team has a lot of money invested in a couple players and they're long term. The Mets, what do you have, Lindor and Nimmo? Is that it kind of for like the big chunky
Well,
contracts? So they're
yeah.
big, but I'm wondering, like, is this team like secretly going to go crazy again in the offseason? Like, I feel
Well,
like they could.
look, you know Juan Soto well, and I'd imagine that if Steve Cohen is going to spend $600+ million, he's going to try to give it to that guy
That
first.
was nuts. That'd
So
be nuts.
I honestly think that's the play for the Mets this offseason. They're going to be in that pursuit. I mean, they were in the pursuit for Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Juan Soto is going to have their full attention at the beginning of the offseason. I think what would happen if they don't sign Juan Soto, which is going to be tough to do,
Mhm.
then it becomes like Pete Alonso, who is like the best homegrown player in God knows how long since David Wright. Pete Alonso is the fallback plan. He's
Yeah.
it, as the free agency goes on. I don't think Pete Alonso's market's going to develop quickly. Juan Soto, that domino will fall, and then at that point, if it's not to the Mets, then a dialogue will reopen with Pete Alonso. Maybe they get something done. But look, they have two players, like you said, that are locked up, and the big one's Lindor. I feel better about Francisco Lindor on his long-term deal, despite how much it is, than most players in baseball because he posts, plays every day. He's a great leader. So I think they're in good shape just because of Lindor.
Mhm.
But we'll see where that money gets spent. They're going to sign some guys for sure. There's a lot coming off the books.
Man, poaching Soto, it can't happen. I'm sorry. I hate to break it to Mets fans. I just don't know how you live in a world where Steve Cohen would essentially be like Michael Corleone and The Godfather and like just own all of New York. If you went and took Juan Soto from them, which is ostensibly kind of what would happen if the Yankees are like, yeah, this is like the best player we've had in forever next to Judge, but whatever. I want my owner to get a new yacht. That would be crazy. I just don't think they're going to let that happen. So I think that, for Mets fans and Padres fans, I think that the advantage of it is, well, I don't know if these teams are going to be in on the Juan Soto sweepstakes or at least acquire him in any way. I think it's a really deep offseason. I think that there's a lot of interesting free agents, including some bounce back guys, your Walker Buehlers, for example, as a starting pitcher. So I think it could be interesting. But when it comes to, before we get into the pitching matchups, who are some under the radar players to watch out for, aside from maybe some of the ones that did yesterday? But you keep it, screw it. You can talk about whoever, even if they did well yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I would say underrated. I mean, you can look at like Jose Iglesias or Jesse Winker, guys that are as valuable. I think the
Mhm.
guy to watch if you're a Padres fan that's just checking out this Mets team for the first time, or obviously you watched them earlier, but it's Mark Vientos for me, just because this guy is now batting second on this team. He has 20 home runs in his first 80 games played. He's been an absolute force for the Mets. So he's a fun guy to watch, and he's going to be a big part of the Mets' future.
Yeah, absolutely. He's one to look out for. This Mets lineup, just as deep in a lot of ways as the Padres, except a little bit more home run power. I believe they are 5th or 6th in baseball right now in home runs, while the Padres are around 12th or 13th. Whatever. I'll look up those numbers later. And yeah, Jesse Winker. I really enjoyed his walk-off hit and him flexing towards the bench and throwing his helmet, despite the fact that he was one of the people getting upset with Jerks and Profar for being happy that he hit a walk-off home run and celebrated in front of his home crowd, basically the same way. So basically what I'm trying to say is that baseball players are idiots. But before we get into, go ahead.
I just want to say,
go for it, please.
It's my understanding that the Jerks and Profar situation, Profar looked in the other dugout. Okay, and baseball players, they get a little sensitive, right? So
yeah,
you can celebrate like crazy as Jesse Winker did if you're looking at your dugout. But if you look at the opposing team's dugout, whoo!
I love the semantics of the unwritten rules. Don't run too fast, but don't run too slow. Yes, don't wear your hat backwards, but you can wear it to the side. Whatever kind of dumb, arbitrary stuff that they come up with to be mad that people can't just have their own personality. One of my favorite national pastimes from the national pastime. But before we get into the rest of the pitching matchups, guys, and I'll get off my soapbox too, let me just take a second to talk to you about the new iconic sponsor of Locked On Padres and, in some cases, Locked On Mets. It is Tonal, not to be confused with that old streaming service title. Don't worry, that is not what this is. But let me tell you, Tonal gets stuff done, because if you are someone who works out, if you want to stay in shape, they really help you out big time. For those of us wanting to get all that stuff in, you need Tonal, the smart strength training system that takes the guesswork out of working out so you can make sure you're making the most of every rep. It's great. I love Tonal. I love what I've been seeing about them. They're very helpful. It's the world's smartest and most effective strength training system to help you out and make your workouts just more efficient, more productive. Me, for example, I forget what rep I'm on pretty much every time I'm in the gym, which, granted, looking at me, not often, but still, it really does help to just have something to help you out and give you basically a personal trainer to help optimize every workout for you. And it uses adaptive digital weight to advance your training techniques. From professionals to schmucks like me to a mom of 3 to a professional athlete, whatever it is, Tonal is trusted by thousands who have become their strongest. And right now, they're offering our listeners $200 off your Tonal purchase with promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's right, $200. It's Tonal.com and use promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $200 off your purchase. Tonal, TONAL.com, promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $200 off. Go check it out. And just like that, everybody, we are back thriving and vibing here on the Locked On Padres, Locked On Mets crossover extravaganza. And we are talking about some pitching matchups, folks. We saw what happened last night between Dylan Cease and Luis Severino. And hey, one thing that's been frustrating for this Padres team, I think, this year is that for some reason they aren't very consistent with Dylan Cease starts, despite being one of their best pitchers. He's 12-10 on the season. But now we get into one of the most deadly Padres. And I mean deadly because, oh boy, I cannot wait to hear the SNY broadcast potentially exacerbate this made-up narrative that Musgrove cheated. That was really adorable when they did that after they won.
Did you not see his ears?
Did you not see his ears? It was great. It's like the guy who 2 days ago talked about how winning with the Astros didn't feel right is then going to go on national TV and just cheat. I just thought it was really beautiful. Stay New York, New Yorkers. Joe Musgrove versus Paul Blackburn. Paul Blackburn, how has he been? Because that was a sneaky, low-cost addition that they made at the deadline from one of the worst teams and organizations in baseball in the A's. How has he been so far? Do you think that this guy's kind of an under-the-radar interesting piece?
Honestly, that was one of the best trades of the deadline for sure at this point. Paul Blackburn, for one, comes with another year of control for next season as well. And of his 4 starts so far, there's been one bad one against his former team, so maybe they knew a little something on him. But his other 3 starts have been quality starts, 6 innings, I believe 1 earned run each time. So he has been really consistent. It'll be interesting to see him go up against this Padres lineup, but Paul Blackburn was a huge addition for the Mets because without him, I don't know where the rotation would be. I mean, it was really big. It's crazy because you get Kodai Senga back for a single start, and he gets hurt in the start, ends up pulling a calf muscle. Right before that, Christian Scott went down. So the Mets went from optioning Tyler McGill to seeing Christian Scott get hurt. Oh, we got Senga back. Senga's out. All of a sudden, they really needed a 5th starter, and Blackburn has filled in very well. So I'm looking forward to see how he does in this one, but that was a definite must pick up by the Mets, and it worked out really well.
Yeah, it's kind of the Padres equivalent of Martin Perez, who's been really solid for them, despite being this back end guy. It wasn't the sexy, Jack Flaherty, Zach Eflin type, or Garrett Crochet, who I understand wasn't traded, but really always it happens every year. There's always some guy that a team gets. I'm not saying that's what you should target at the deadline, but there's always some sort of under the radar guy that ends up doing well. 3.68 ERA so far with the Mets, and then Joe Musgrove. I think this is easily the most anticipated game for me this weekend, not because I think it's going to be the best game or anything like that, but Musgrove being back, if he can be what he usually is, which he hasn't been for much this year. It's mostly been due to some ailments that he's been battling, but nonetheless, last start, velocity was up on basically all his pitches. That's a good sign. Is he back? That is what we're going to learn against a very tough, very gritty Mets lineup led by Lindor and Vientos and Alonso, among others. So that's going to be really interesting. Easily the start that I think, just from a team perspective, that is the most important for you to learn about the Padres going forward, especially with Matt Waldron, Matty Nux being optioned to AAA. That was a little bit of a surprise yesterday, but my hope is with the aforementioned Perez and as well as Musgrove, and then hopefully maybe the return of Yu Darvish. Maybe they are like, don't worry, we're okay. It's okay. We have some reinforcements. There's a reason why we did trade for starting pitching at the deadline. So looking forward to that one. Saturday's game is a matchup between the iconic David Peterson and a guy who low-key might finish top 5 in Cy Young, Michael King. Sir, what can you tell us about David Peterson?
David Peterson has quietly been one of the Mets' best pitchers this year, which it allows me to feel better about myself because going into last season, I said David Peterson can be a 3, and he pitched to an ERA over 5. Did not feel good about that, but then we found out in the offseason he was dealing with a hip injury. He got surgery to clean that up, and since coming back, he has been really good. He's got a 3 ERA and 14 starts, and the Mets are 11-3 when David Peterson takes the mound. Every team might have that starting pitcher that just for whatever reason gets all the run support. That has been David Peterson this year. But he's held up his side of the bargain as well. So it's going to be pretty interesting to watch that game. 2 guys that have pitched very well lately. I think that's probably the best pitching matchup we have left here as far as just what those 2 guys will offer.
Yeah. And on the Michael King side of things, look, this guy's been basically untouchable, solid since June. I've talked a lot on this show about how some of his only bad starts, one against Milwaukee, in which he gave up 5 across 6 innings and still struck out 8, that was just one bad inning where it was a lot of ground balls that made it through. Not saying that you don't want to give up hard hit ground balls, but the fact that they were all on the ground shows you, especially with some of the defenders on his Padres team, might have been a little bit unfortunate. And then the other start that he had that wasn't so great was against the Pirates. But even in that one, he was still pretty good. And it was just like one bad pitch he made. So I think it was Andrew McCutchen. But other than that, Michael King has been awesome. Padres really need to get a victory out of this one. I know David Peterson has been like, okay, right? He's not like a total walkover. But let me tell you, this Padres team struggles against lefties. They have their moments, especially with someone like Jay Cronenworth, young guys like Jackson Merrill. So that is something to watch out for sure. King's going to have to be on. And if the Padres lost this one, though, it wouldn't surprise me because they're weird against lefties. I saw them get shut down by like Tyler Anderson a few months ago, like getting swept by the Angels. So that's one to look out for. And then the last matchup of the weekend, Martin Perez versus Jose Quintana. What can you tell us about Quintana?
That's the start. That's the start I have circled. Perez versus Quintana, man.
Okay. All right.
Which one will pitch into the 5th? It's going to be Jose Quintana. He had a really bad start his last time out. What did he give up? Like 7 runs. And he's had a bad month in general. His ERA is over 8. I did a show after that outing. Pretty much, are the Mets stuck with Jose Quintana? And my conclusion was yes, because there isn't an alternative outside of Tyler McGill, who hasn't pitched well this year either. Jose Quintana has 3 months this year with a sub 3.5 ERA. So he has been able to lock in for stretches. What you have to watch for with Quintana is what that curveball looks like. If he's able to steal strikes with it and also, pitch with that curveball in the zone when guys are swinging at it and not just teeing off, he's going to have a good day. If he doesn't have that sharp bite to it, it's going to be a longer day for Quintana. We'll see. I'm glad to learn that the Padres struggle versus lefties because Quintana can use the help in this one.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And then for Perez, mentioned him earlier, not great in his last start. 4 2/3, gave up 3 earned runs on 7 hits. He basically just had one bad meatball to, I believe it was Ryan Jeffers, and that's it. Perez has been okay. Now, here's the thing. If you go on Baseball Savant, which everybody likes to do, I know, I see the stuff. I see the sliders. They're all ice cold. I understand that. However, in the 3 starts he's had with the Padres, 4 starts that he's had with the Padres, he's been pretty good. And there's a little bit more suggestion that maybe this guy can do kind of what Matt Waldron did early on in the year for this team. Just be a capable 5 to throw you innings. And he's done that. And he's been getting strikeouts. In fact, he had his season high in his 3rd starts, 8 strikeouts against his former team, the Pirates. So unlike Paul Blackbird, his former team did not know anything about him. But what we've seen is a pitch in usage, more whiffs. So there's at least hope, especially with the god Ruben Niebla, pitching coach for the Padres. I think there could be something here. At least someone who's a 5. Similar to what Matt Waldron delivered, just be solid, have a couple good starts, get us through the season. Because once they get to the playoffs, you're just hoping that you've got Darvish, Musgrove, Cease, King. You can absolutely win playoff series with that. I don't care what anybody else says. I don't know why people aren't. Jordan Montgomery was like the best starting pitcher in the playoffs last year. Like, what are we doing, guys? Stop. You don't need to have prime DeGrom or anything like that. But I think that is another start that is really, really important for the Padres. If he gets lit up, it's like, all right, Linsanity run is officially over. That was fun while it lasted, but really looking forward to that and seeing if the Padres can hopefully win this series. I don't know how many games they're going to get here. You cannot get swept. I think that you have to leave with at least a tie. It's boring, but the Padres get to play not just the Cardinals, but then the Rays after this. And then in September, they have 1 game against Atlanta, which is funny. And then 1 game against the White Sox, which is funny, like back-to-back days. And then they have some series against the Red Sox, Reds, Blue Jays, whatever. So it gets a little bit weird for them later in August when they have to play the Braves for those playoff spots and the Phillies. So that'll be interesting, but big series, man. I'm looking forward to it. Do you have any final notes you'd like to share with the good people?
FanDuel on Sunday, Mark Fianto's home run prop. He's taking Martin Perez deep. I mean, clearly.
Okay, that was mean, but all right. That final note. That's not what I thought you were going to say, but hey, go check that out if you guys want. But yeah, that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, guys. The only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Check out Locked On Mets as well. Follow Fink on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. Stay tuned to next week. We'll be recapping the last 3 games of this series, as well as should be having Arm Layton on the show, a friend of both of ours, to talk about the Padres farm system. Because I alluded to it for a segment, how much they gave up. Let's talk about it. Maybe he's going to tell me relax, and that Robbie Snelling is a scrub. I don't know. You'll have to look forward to that. But until that, stay safe, and of course, stay faithful. My Friar Faithful homies, take care.